amidst sun-gilded seashore, salt-washed breeze, and the occasional cacophony of seagulls. A weathered old man drags an equally old and worn dory up and onto a lonely rock in the middle of the cove. He's been looking forward to this moment all day. A chance to get away from everyone and everything. To lose himself in the soothing breath of the tide, as well as his stories. These are stories from the rock. Hi everyone, I'm your host, T.C. Bursey, and you're tuning in to the very first episode of Newfoundland and Labrador's latest podcast, Stories from the Rock. If you're wondering what to expect, here are the bare bones of it. As the name suggests, this is a podcast that tells the stories of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, short stories to be exact. Not just my own scribblings of a mad Newfoundlander, though you'll get at least one of those per month, but countless stories, fiction and non-fiction alike, from writers all across Newfoundland and Labrador. Stories from the Rock isn't just a great way to unwind after a hard day, or a familiar voice to keep you company on your evening commute, but also a free space for talented writers in our province to strut their stuff, showcase their skills, and contribute in their own unique way to Newfoundland and Labrador's literary and artistic culture. Especially those of us who face social and systemic barriers, or an otherwise uneven playing field. A bit about me now, not too much, as your podcast's host. My full name is actually Terry Carson Bursey, but creatively I go by TC, a moniker my big sister gave to me in childhood when I told her I wanted to be a writer. I've been a storyteller as far back as I can remember. I kinda had no choice in the matter. It was inevitable. Growing up neurodivergent in a small town will turn just about anyone into a daydreamer. And I found my best daydreams on the rocky beach in front of my childhood home in Dover. It's the town with those floating houses and the black and white pictures you might have seen hanging on one wall or another, perhaps even on your own walls. In fact, that same two-story white house landed on the very beach I just spoke about, dragged across open water from Silver Fox Island to the rocky shore in front of my house in Dover, what was then called Wellington. And all that is a fitting segue into our first story. It's called Eliza Blackwood and the Secret of Butcher's Cove. Miss Blackwood. Miss, we're nearly here now. Eliza's eyes flew open, and she gasped a sharp breath, clutching at her throat as if to tear away the ethereal fingers that still clung onto her from the inky depths of her nightmares. Her vibrant blue, green, and gold eyes zeroed in on the man hovering over her from within a starry moonlit sky spattered in wispy blueberry and cream clouds. She took foul note of the beer on the man's breath and shuddered. As the straw-strewn wagon lurched over a rock in the road, Eliza nearly heaved her evening supper of egg sandwiches onto her lap, the lap of her black woolen coat. "The sight and smell of you are enough to turn milk, Mr. Hunt," Eliza barked at the man, trying to compose herself as she plucked straw from her frayed bun of obsidian hair. "And the smell of your breath, my God, man, have you been imbibing spirits this entire journey?" The short, stout, and stocky wagon driver grinned from within his thick red whiskers and mutton chops to reveal a full set of moon-white teeth that somehow seemed too big for his head. Likely false. This man fell prey to the pleasures of sugar and rum at a young age, same as the rest on this side of the coast. Rotten rum runners and shrewd merchants, their legacy left its mark on Newfoundland even now, in 1961. It's likely the whole area's been stricken down from peppermint knobs, chocolate bars, and molasses taffy. Those poor, ill-nurtured youngsters. It's no wonder they called me to this wretched place. Ha! That's school teachers for you. Even one so young and pretty as you got a voice as sharp as the straps you uses on the palms of them youngsters. Good, I says. Friggin' youngsters here in Wellington is so wild as redheads. I hope you can dodge a rock, that's all I can say, cautioned the drunken wagon driver. Anyway, you won't have to look at me or smell me too much longer. That's unless you pays your fare with a tumble. I don't rightly care what purse you actually pays me from. Eliza was understandably aghast. Do you always end your ghastly, ill-begotten sentences with prepositions? Mr. Hunt guffawed. Missus, I'm not prepositioning to you. I'm already married. Oh, for heaven's sake, mumbled Eliza, angrily clawing through her purse to get the stipend papers before her whereabouts truly began to swell into the forefront of her mind. Mr. Hunt, we've yet to arrive at our destination. You were well informed of the address in advance. This is outrageous. Nope, this here's Butcher's Cove. Not outrageous. Boss said, first lot by the sawmill in Butcher's Cove in Wellington, said the man, sounding each word out individually as if strenuously recalling them as such. Where the rocky hill is to, that's where we're at now. Eliza turned and beheld the moonlit hills behind her, dotted with ragged gray rocks that she knew from her geology studies to be glacial erratics lodged in the small drumlin left behind from the Ice Age. It was indeed the hill she had seen from the photographs that Mr. Rogers had sent to her by mail, but she was assured there would be a house. Eliza hopped down from the end of the dirty wooden wagon as the ginger driver gulped another bottle of Dominion ale and began unceremoniously heaving out her velvet suitcases and antique trunks. There's no house here. What are you doing? Unloading your luggage. You complained on it not being a taxi cab. You complained about it not being able to sleep, and now you're complaining about neither house being here waiting. You can complain by yourself, starting now, I says, offered Mr. Hunt, punctuated by a loud belch. Elizabeth Abigail Blackwood was used to men like these from her father's docks in St. John's. Men so addled from nightly drink that they could scarcely remain upright, let alone employed. There was only one way to deal with them, according to her brilliant father. Elizabeth, when it comes to the drunken lout, one must merely employ the Socratic method. Mr. Hunt, if I am to reside in the seaside village, what would I require? A house and a husband. Best to have the husband first to build you one, he burped. And it being what I presume to be around 11 in the evening, without a house, where am I to sleep tonight? Where am I to eat? Where am I to live, Mr. Hunt? Eliza inquired, straining to keep the venom from her voice in spite of her mounting rage. Tonight? Don't rightly care. Boss tried to tell you. That you was too early. House will be here tomorrow afternoon sometime. Can't do it during the night, and today's a Sunday. Lucky that I got youngsters to feed and can't afford the Lord's Day like the rest of 'em can, said Mr. Hunt. He's not lying. The man is so drunk that he believes a house will be built tomorrow. And how, pray tell, will my house be built here in this Butcher's Cove by tomorrow afternoon? Do we employ the Amish or drunken locals? The red-headed wagon driver laughed at that as he sauntered over to Eliza. By, I thought you school teachers was supposed to be smart. I never said they'd build you a house. The house is already built. They're floating it here from Bragg's Island tomorrow. Or was it Silver Fox Island? Rogers is on both islands, so it could be either one. Anyways, I'll need me pay, miss." Eliza was dumbstruck. She had heard tales that outporters were floating their houses across open water for the resettlement mandate, being dragged by motorboats driven by louts as drunk as this one. But along with everyone else in St. John's, Eliza had dismissed the rumors as yet more tall tales, nonsense from the slack-jawed, gap-toothed maws of bay noddies. Such a complex and risky feat of engineering was surely impossible for these simpletons. You honestly thought I'd believe that these people are capable of uprooting an entire home and then escorting said building like a child's dollhouse taken by the tide across open ocean and then rooting it back into place on some slab-stiffened bog? You? Probably not. Now, I'm starting to lose me patience so well as me buzz, and you can take care of both by paying me fair," said the man, now appearing angry and threatening as he squared his shoulders, puffed his barreled chest, and gave Eliza a sour look that quickly melted into a wolfish grin. "And if you've no money for me, I'll gladly take me fare another way. I told you true when I said I'd take payment from either purse." Eliza's father had said another thing about men like Hunt. If such ill-tempered men are roused to passions by your bearing, however, the best way to deal with them is mercilessly. With lightning speed, Eliza drove the heel of her hand up and into the wagon driver's wide and greasy nose. As his eyes began to water, she locked the middle joints of her right index and ring fingers and swiftly drove them into his eyes, raking downwards with her nails to carve jagged red lines down the man's wicked cheeks, like the painted tears of a circus clown. "The Lord thunder it!" was all that the wagon driver could say before Eliza kicked him between his legs, grabbed the metal handle of her 2-kilogram wooden chest, and swung it as hard as she could into the man's downturned face, sending Mr. Hunt flying backwards into the rear of his wagon, where he lay motionless, legs dangling and twitching from the wagon's edge. Eliza blew a stray wisp of hair out from her eyes and cleared her throat. "I've your pay right here, Mr. Hunt. Use it to feed your wretched family rather than your wretched habits." Eliza Blackwood took the stipend papers from her sponsor and lodged them deep into the waist of Mr. Hunt's pants before sauntering up to the waiting brown horse and slapping its behind. Hard. The horse nickered loudly and took off like a bullet fired from a gun, straight up the hill to their left, where another man stood grinning at Eliza from beneath a tall aspen tree. "You'll forgive me for not intervening on your behalf, Miss Blackwood. You seem to have the matter well in hand. Old Belvedere Hunt has had that coming to him for a long time." In the shadow of the tree that hissed like a den of snakes in the dying breeze, the man's face was hard for Eliza to make out, but this voice was a very familiar one. The two of them had several telephone conversations in preparation for her arrival in Wellington, and Eliza easily recalled the sultry cadence and rugged nature of the voice a dozen times in the more pleasant dreams that interposed her nightmares. "Mr. Rogers, I presume?" asked Eliza, as she flustered and hurried toward him. "I pray you not think of me as a wild thing who would do harm to anyone as I just did now. I was merely trained to defend myself against such brutes by my father. There's no need to—" "Get the authorities involved," finished Mr. Rogers, stepping into the moonlight and striking a match to light his rolled cigarette, illuminating the most handsome face that Eliza ever saw. "This is not St. John's, miss. I'm afraid there's no authorities to call, and the nearest police station would take the call rather sourly, I'd add. They've got bigger trout to catch than a school teacher who roughed up the town drunk, or the leader of said drunks, I should say." Eliza's nervous energy seemed to flow toward her luggage, where she began gathering up her many strewn possessions that she had exploded out of her small chest upon colliding it with Mr. Hunt. Mr. Rogers hurried to help her, and the two exchanged a quick smile as they crouched together. When they straightened, Rogers offered his hand while exhaling a small yet powerful tuft of smoke. Eliza took it and was at once struck by the many calluses of the hand, stark against the eloquence of his voice and bearing. It told her that he was both a working man and a learned one. "Robert Rogers of Bragg's Island, at your service. But call me Rob," said the man. "Elizabeth Blackwood, of St. John's, but you may call me however you please." "Rob Rogers." "May I call you Eliza? I feel as though Eliza would suit you very well." Eliza felt her cheeks reddening, even more than the ordeal with the wagon driver had caused them to flush. "Aye, you may. That's what my mother used to call me." "Aye? I knew I placed a bit of that accent before. You're a Scot, aren't you?" Eliza laughed then, fanning her cheeks that were hot in the cool of the autumn evening. Well, yes, I mean, of a sort. My father's side is part Scottish, and my mother was an Irishwoman from Derry. They both eloped to Newfoundland after my father inherited his father's estate. I was born in the town of Gander, believe it or not, the first Newfoundlander of both Blackwood and O'Brien bloodlines, though I suppose we're a lot of us Canadians now. You'd have a harder time convincing the people of Wellington that they're Canadian than you did convincing Belv Hunt to take a nap, that's for sure. We're all island stock in these parts. The small islands, I mean. The Glovers, Felthams, Orams, Rogers and Berseys. We all came from the smaller islands out a ways from here. To us, this is as mainland as it gets. This shore we're standing on here now. A mainland beyond this might as well not exist. This brings me to me point, Eliza. If I may be so bold as to mention it, you're a day earlier than I expected, and I'm afraid your house isn't ready yet. Belv may be a dumb old drunk, but he was right about that. Your house will indeed be coming from Bragg's Island sometime tomorrow afternoon, if weather permits it. Another few hours to have it settled away before supper. That house was me family home for nearly 4 generations. But resettlement is expensive, and I've built myself a smaller apartment on the hill where I've built me general store," dumped Rogers, gesturing to a large light-coloured and striped building atop the dirt road that Eliza had sent the lout-laden wagon hurtling toward. "Oh," mewed Eliza, "then where am I to stay tonight? Is there an inn, a boarding house with a vacancy, or—" Eliza trailed off as Mr. Rogers laughed. "This is a fish plant community, Eliza Blackwood. There's nothing like that around here for hundreds of kilometers in either side of the loop. That said, as long as you're open to it, I can take you to see the house tonight, and you can safely lodge there with me and me wife. Wife, of course. If you'd be open to a bit of company before bed. We're a non-drinking family, but we do keep our hands idle by lamplight with a game or two of bridge. Just don't tell the church crowd we plays it. The wife is in right deep with 'em, she is. Has to play bridge in secret." "What options are there, Eliza? Not just for tonight's shelter, but your entire life. A woman of 25 has little options left, it would seem." "No, stop that, Eliza Blackwood. You know your studies would take time, and you still have time left, despite what Mother says." "Mr. Rogers, I would be delighted to spend the night in your company, the company of you and your family. But you mentioned that my house, I suppose, with the rather convoluted papers having already been signed, is on a remote island some distance from Butcher's Cove. The nearest airport is back the way I came, in the town of Gander. How are we to get there?" He answered only with a smile. "Oh, this is invigorating!" Eliza screamed into the artificial wind at the prow of Rob's speedboat. "What?" yelled Mr. Rogers from far behind, where a dark part of Eliza hoped that handsome man was getting a strong whiff of her costly French perfume. "I said, this is wonderful!" laughed Eliza, relishing the wind in her now unsheathed black hair as she was mesmerized by the moonlight dancing on the vast expanse of glassy water before her. She had always adored water, but had never stepped foot on a sea-going vessel prior to that night. The experience was akin to a long-awaited baptism for Eliza Blackwood of St. John's. They were nearing a cozy grass-covered island that appeared the color of pale mint in the starlit darkness. The heavens were reflected perfectly against the water, so still and clear that Eliza could see shooting stars upon its silky surface, as if stargazing downward upon a vast silver mirror. Suddenly, the boat lurched, and Eliza nearly fell forward into the water that she so admired. "Son of a—" began Rob, and a string of poetic curses followed. Eliza turned around in worry, knowing little reason for the profanity's usage over a minor mechanical issue, hinting that it might have been a regular, ongoing one. "Likely the fuel lines, by the sound of it. It's choking itself off because it can't get the right air-to-gasoline ratio for proper sustained combustion." "I keep tellin' John that it's the fuel lines. Dim Glovers is hard to friggin' deal with, by. I should be doing it all myself if I could find the friggin' time to do it, frig's sake." And he just had to be married. "I'm gonna row us over to Grassy Rock. It's the Pan Island straight ahead of us," yelled Rob, his nature now surprisingly calm, giving away the cathartic reasoning behind his cursing. "That's clever, Rob. It's best to repair marine vessels while they're moored, so long as there's land available to moor them," she called to Rob, much louder than she had intended. "Ha! You're not deaf, are you? Motor is loud, isn't it? Oh, I loves it, truth be told. There's nothing at all in the world like the sound of an engine when she's running on full blast," he yelled back, grinning. "How does a woman from St. John's know so much about how to handle a motorboat? I thought you were Wellington's new school teacher, not the new trawler skipper." Eliza laughed as she handed Rob one of the long oars clasped at her left, turning around to face him in full. "I've been enamored with water for as long as I could remember. I always wanted to be a sailor, though it wasn't in the stars. My father insisted on a traditional education and an even more traditional role for the result of it. Once in university, I focused on becoming a marine engineer. I wanted to design and build offshore oil rigs. But father insisted on you becoming a school teacher instead, like all the other girls in your class. Am I right? Teachers or nurses, that's all they ever churn out, at least around here," lamented Rob, making Eliza love him even more with every passing syllable. "Precisely," said Eliza, clutching the pendant at her chest and turning away. They neared the island rapidly as Rob rowed, and Rob was the first to jump out from the rear of it, sending sharp splashes up and around his dark green rubber boots. Rob donned a pair of thick leather gloves and tied the prow rope to a coarse, rusty iron ring in the sandy ground. "Why tie it so tightly?" asked Eliza, enthralled by seeing in action what she'd only ever read about. "There's not a breath of wind left from the breeze we had earlier." "Not yet, there's not. Wind in Butcher's Cove can change on the fart of a moose in Badger's Key. The tide is trickier, too. Tide can pull a boat away just so well as a wind can. There's no telling how long it'll take to fix it. But I'd like to think I'll get her done quick." "Quickly," Eliza corrected, out of habit. Eliza gazed out at the water one last time as she hopped down onto the grass-strewn island the size of a mansion's foundations. The litheness of her steps seemed to surprise Rob as he climbed aboard to fetch the motor and tools. Whenever he looked at her, Eliza's heart leapt. This cove is beautiful, no matter what angle it's seen from. I could see the appeal of wanting to stay out on your small islands, but this cove is just so beautiful. Why is it called Butcher's Cove, anyway? It seems like such a dark name for such a picturesque part of Wellington. Was there a butcher who used to live here before? Perhaps a family surname? You ask a lot of questions for a school teacher. This cove has a bloody history, I'm afraid, replied Rob, suddenly pensive and staring out over the water along with Eliza. The name comes from a bloodbath that happened here long ago. This cove was once owned by a small offshoot of the Beothic people of Newfoundland. They thought this cove was beautiful too, human as they were. Of course, that meant that our terrified and well-armed ancestors had a fight on their hands to settle here. Most of us ended up on the islands for just that reason. Our families struck a deal with the natives. We could cut our wood, fish the waters, and trap for hares whenever we wanted, but our homes were to stay on the islands to the northeast. Our native friends kept the mainland of the cove, and though we were different as chalk and cheese, we slowly built a friendship with each other. We helped each other survive when times was hard, through illness and hunger both. Of course, other families in neighbouring villages didn't have such an agreement in place and saw our friends as uncivilized. Around the start of the 1800s, those foreign families drove our mainland friends out of their village in the worst way possible. Us islanders called them butchers for it, and rightly so. Not to startle you, Eliza, but that grassy bank where I met you by the road is where many of them remain buried to this day. The butchers or the natives? Asked Eliza, wrapped by the tale. Yes, replied Rob, finishing his odd single-word response with a loaded look. Our island families have governed ourselves for a long time, and murder was a serious charge. But according to the laws of those times, slaughtering of natives was usually seen as an act of self-defense. Are you suggesting that your own laws were separate from the Crown's? That's right, confirmed Rob. Crown was never able to reach us out on the islands. That's part of why resettlement is being ordered on like it is here now. Canadian government wants to be able to police the islands and collect the convoluted taxes were supposedly accrued since the 40s. They want to take the family's self-governance away and keep us under control like good little newfies. Take the dole, pay the taxes, and bow to the civilized Mecca in Ontario. The poetry of Rob's words and the passion he evoked to speak them sent a rod of light through the centre of her. Eliza stole a good look at him for the first time as he stared out of the glimmering water in profile. Dark, sea-weathered skin, coffee-coloured eyes framed by an almost hawk-like brow, and a golden brown beard that was barely there, like the velvet of a horse's muzzle. To Eliza Blackwood of St. John's there was a fiery intelligence to Rob Rogers that caused her to squirm from within her own hide like a cat kneading its paws into a cushion. I'd like to watch you work, if that's acceptable. I have a fascination with engines. Oh, there's plenty more interesting things here to discover. Why not take a walk around Grassy Rock first, so I don't get nervous with you hovering around? When it comes time to fix it, I'll bawl out to you, winked Rob Rogers as he turned to busy himself at dislodging the motor. You might find that you can't get rid of me that easily, Mr. Rogers, flirted Eliza, made brazen by the fun of the night and instantly feeling guilty about her shameless remark. He claims to be wed, yet wears no ring. Resettlement must have forced him to sell it. Something tells me, Eliza Blackwood, that you might be right, replied the man, his dark eyes reflecting as much as the dark water did, and more besides. Not wanting to upset the moment, Eliza sauntered away from the enigmatic man and his brazen boat in search of moonlit discoveries. Following the meager strip of sand that bordered Grassy Rock, she soon found a curious mind's most alluring marine fixation. A tide pool! What lurks in it? Eliza bent low to peer with childish delight at the small crab that was feasting on what appeared to be a graying strip of some deceased sea creature. It's a squid, or is it salted pork? It almost looks like a grah! Shouted a raspy voice from behind her. Eliza's breath caught in her throat, and she whirled around to throw a strong punch in the direction of the sound. But Rob was already hunched over while holding his sides, dodging the assault accidentally within the throes of childish laughter. "Oh, Robert Rogers, you devil! You've frightened the Holy Ghost from me!" Eliza cried, breaking into a wide grin nonetheless. "How on earth did you learn to move so silently? Did your friends from the Cove pass on that skill to your family as well?" "Yes, I believe they did," laughed Rob, bowing. "That and a drop of native blood. My great-grandfather was one of those friends from the Cove, truth be told. One can see it on me face plain enough when they sees me in the light, Miss Blackwood. I hope that news doesn't scare you. I am not some isolated prairie Puritan. I'll have you know my great-grandfather came from the other side of the world. From Japan. Times were hard for my father and I after the war, for one could see it plainly enough when they saw our faces in the light too, Mr. Rogers." The man straightened then, and looked at her in full for the first time. "Somehow, I knew that already. Even from our telephone conversations, I just knew that you were somehow like me. I felt that too. This strange, subliminal notion that you knew the same flavor of pain that I've tasted. Those phone calls. Even though we spoke so little, we spoke volumes. Did I say that right?" Rob asked, suddenly embarrassed. Eliza laughed. "Yes, Robert, you said that correctly." An odd but poignant silence hung between them, amidst a backdrop of falling stars that held their own secrets. A sudden and strong gust of wind blew between them, followed by in short order by the sound of wood striking rock. Rob's eyes widened, and Eliza whipped around to see. "The boat!" they both cried in unison, and the two bolted for the mooring. "You tied it tightly?" Eliza asked as she ran breathlessly behind the swift Rob Rogers. "You knows full well I did, but there's rocks there too, and lots of weight aboard," Eliza cursed, and Rob broke his stride to turn back at her, impressed. The wooden speedboat was a lot to take in. The punt had indeed struck a buried rock hard at the prow, a large dent punching inwards into the rapidly flooding boat as waves kicked up around it. But amidst the harrowing sight was a paradoxically more pressing development. The iron loop that Rob had used for the mooring was not a true mooring ring at all, but a handle of a cellar hatch, said Eliza. An old buried cellar on a minuscule island in the center of a cove like this, with no sign of a foundation to indicate it was ever built upon. What on me friggin' boat! By the gentle lamplight and blessed be the friggin' old jumpin' old rooster chokin' blood of a friggin'... And then Rob stopped. regarding the now open sodded driftwood cellar door with Eliza, who crept toward the opening with growing apprehension. And that concludes the first half of Eliza Blackwood and the Secret of Butcher's Cove, written by me, T.C. Bursey. Next week, we'll continue the rest of it. And, in the meantime, why don't you look us up on Facebook? Give us a like and a follow. And if you're a writer in Newfoundland and Labrador who would like to showcase your own work, don't hesitate to send an email. It's storiesfromtherock@proton.me. Give us your short story, a little bit about yourself, and you might find yourself on this podcast, or at least me reading out your work. So thank you for listening. Be sure to tune in next week for more stories from the Rock.